Good afternoon, my dear friends. My name is Grandma Martha, 78 years young, and I'm speaking to you today from my modest home in Lexington, Kentucky. But the story I'm about to share with you happened many years ago, in a small town called Oakwood, right in the heart of America. You see, Oakwood is a town that today is a peaceful place, filled with beautiful waterfalls and historic houses, often visited by tourists. But back in the 1960s, it was nothing more than a quiet village where everybody knew each other's business, and the gossip traveled faster than wildfire. It was a world where traditions and expectations were carved into stone, and girls like me were told exactly what our lives should look like. I was born in 1947, a time when girls like me barely had the right to dream. My father, Mr. Anthony, was a stonemason who built half the houses in our town with his own hands. He was respected by everyone but had a temper like the devil. My mother, Mrs. Elizabeth, was a seamstress, known for her craftsmanship, making everything from wedding dresses to work clothes. She worked with the fabric of our lives, stitching together a simple but decent existence. Growing up, our house wasn't much, but we made do. 3 small bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a backyard full of fruit trees my mother tended like they were her own children. I was the oldest of 4, myself, Joseph, Anthony Jr., who everyone called Tony, and Grace, the youngest, who arrived when my mother thought she was done having children. She always said Grace was a retirement gift from God. Life in Oakwood during the 60s was simple, predictable, and rigid. Girls from respectable families had a clear path set out for them. Help at home, go to church, and wait for a boy from a good family to come courting with serious intentions. Dating, engagement, marriage, children, that was the life laid out for us. But I wasn't like that. I was too dreamy, too curious about the world beyond the cobblestone streets and gossip-filled air. I loved reading books my teacher secretly lent me, and kept a collection of magazine clippings about far-off places. Paris, Rome, New York City, places I could only dream of visiting someday. And it was in this small, quiet town bound by tradition that I met John. I can still feel the tightness in my chest when I say that name, even after all these years. He arrived in Oakwood in 1965, coming from Washington, D.C. to work as an assistant to the town's only photographer, Mr. Gerald. John was different from any boy I had ever known, with his black hair falling over his eyes and a smile that could light up a room. He made me feel something I had never felt before. Alive, seen, and heard. But little did I know, this dream of love would quickly turn into a nightmare, forever altering the course of my life. Growing up in Oakwood was like living in a storybook, quiet, simple, and predictable. It was a town where the streets were lined with cobblestones, and the houses, though modest, had a charm all their own. The air was filled with the kind of gossip that spread faster than wildfire, and everyone knew everyone's business. It wasn't the kind of place where secrets could be kept for long. You might think that sounds like a curse, but in Oakwood it was a kind of security, a familiarity that wrapped itself around you like a warm, comfortable blanket. But with that comfort came a set of unspoken rules. In Oakwood, tradition ruled the day. Families like mine had a well-defined role in the community, especially the girls. As the oldest daughter, I was expected to follow in the footsteps of the women before me. My mother, my aunts, and all the women of the town who lived lives that could be summed up in just a few sentences. Help at home, go to church, marry a good man, have children, and wait for the inevitable cycle to begin again with the next generation. I often found myself questioning why things had to be so rigid, why the path for girls was already laid out before we even took our first steps. My father, a hard-working man who built half the houses in town, was the perfect example of Oakwood's values. He had a temper like the devil, but he was respected. He expected discipline, and he got it. My mother, on the other hand, was more of a quiet strength, a seamstress who spent hours at her sewing machine, stitching together wedding dresses and work clothes with love and precision. She never questioned the routine we followed. To her, it was simply how things were done, and it was enough. We weren't rich, but we had enough. Our house was small, 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a backyard full of fruit trees that my mother tended to with great care. Every fall, the apples and peaches would ripen, and we would spend weekends picking them together, filling baskets and jars for the long winter months ahead. The smell of fresh mortar that clung to my father's clothes when he returned home from work was something I grew accustomed to, just as I grew accustomed to the quiet predictability of life in Oakwood. But as much as I loved my family and the comfort of our home, I couldn't help but feel a tug within me, a longing for something more. Every evening after finishing my chores and homework, I would retreat to my room, which was decorated with little trinkets and books that took me to faraway places. I didn't just dream of adventure. I dreamt of something bigger, something beyond the small town where everyone knew everyone's name. I dreamed of Paris, of Rome, of New York City, places I only saw in magazines and books. My heart swelled with a sense of possibility that felt completely out of place in Oakwood. No one around me shared those dreams. The girls in town were content with the routine that had been established for them. They were happy with simple lives, finding joy in the things that Oakwood had to offer: church on Sundays, dances in the square, and of course finding a good man to marry. And as the oldest daughter, I was expected to follow the same path. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to life than this quiet conformity. I would often sneak away to read books my teacher lent me in secret. Books about places, people, and ideas far beyond the borders of Oakwood. I kept a collection of magazine clippings of far-off places, each one a little piece of a world I dreamed of exploring. These dreams were my escape, my secret rebellion against the life that was being planned for me. But Oakwood, with its simplicity and expectations, wasn't the kind of place that encouraged dreams like mine. It was a place where conformity was a safety net, a place where you didn't rock the boat too much. If you stayed within the lines, life was comfortable. If you dared to step outside those lines, you risked being seen as strange and outcast. And so, for the most part, I kept my dreams to myself, knowing that the life I desired was as distant and unreachable as the places I fantasized about visiting. It wasn't that I didn't love my family or my town, but deep down, I knew that I was meant for something more. And as I grew older, that knowledge would guide me, even when the world around me tried to keep me in the small, neat box they had created for me. In Oakwood, you could feel the weight of tradition pressing down on you, shaping you, defining you. But as much as it felt like home, I knew it wasn't the place where I could fulfill the dreams that stirred inside me. The small-town life, with its gentle routines and limitations, couldn't contain the yearning in my heart. And one day I would find a way to break free. Growing up in Oakwood, I had always felt like I didn't quite fit in. Life in this small town was simple, predictable, and for the most part content. But for me, it was like being a bird in a cage. No matter how comfortable the cage was, no matter how beautiful the view from the bars, I knew deep inside that I wasn't meant to stay confined forever. I was meant to soar. The trouble was, I didn't know how to escape or where to go. But I didn't know then that the key to my escape would be found in something as simple as books. It was during one of those long, quiet afternoons that I discovered the power of reading. I had always been an avid reader, even if it meant sneaking books from my teacher, Mrs. Waverly, who saw in me something that Oakwood had no place for. She would lend me books about faraway places: Paris, Rome, New York City, places that seemed like distant dreams to a girl like me, a girl living in a town where the biggest excitement was the annual church fair. I remember the first time I read a story about Paris. The words on the page transported me, making me feel like I was walking down the cobbled streets of Montmartre, surrounded by the smell of fresh baguettes and the hum of life in a city that never slept. For a moment I could almost feel the cool breeze against my skin, see the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower above me. I closed the book with a sigh, knowing in my heart that this was where I belonged, somewhere far away from Oakwood, a place where people weren't bound by tradition and expectation. It wasn't just the places that captured my heart, though. It was the idea of possibility. I was learning through these books that the world was so much bigger than Oakwood. It was a world full of opportunities, adventures, and most of all, dreams. And for the first time, I began to wonder if my dreams could be more than just something I read about, if they could be something I actually lived. But living in Oakwood meant following a certain path. As a girl, I was expected to help at home, get a basic education, and wait for a boy to come along and ask for my hand in marriage. Life here was clear-cut, with no room for deviation. You followed the rules and that was that. Anything beyond that was seen as an unnecessary complication, a waste of time. That's why, when I told my parents that I wanted to study something more than just domestic skills, it was met with cold stares and uncomfortable silences. My father especially was a man of tradition. He believed that girls didn't need too much schooling. They needed to learn how to keep a home, be good wives, and raise children. Anything else was unnecessary. But as the months went by, I couldn't ignore the growing sense of restlessness within me. The yearning to see the world, to explore, to create something more than what Oakwood could offer, only grew stronger. And the more I read, the more I realized that I didn't have to accept Oakwood's narrow view of life. I could be more. I could dream bigger. I began to hide my books in secret corners of the house. I'd stay up late at night, reading by candlelight, just to feed my hunger for stories that took me to distant lands. I would daydream about the adventures I would have, the cities I would visit, and the life I would build for myself. I started to imagine a future where I wasn't just a girl in Oakwood, waiting to be married. I imagined myself as an independent woman, with a job, a purpose, and a world full of possibilities. But even as I dreamed, I knew that Oakwood would never accept these ambitions. I was the oldest daughter, after all, and my duty was to help at home, to follow the rules. I had already begun to feel the weight of those expectations, and it was starting to feel like a suffocating blanket that wrapped tighter around me with each passing day. It was around this time, when I had almost given up hope of ever finding a way out, that I met him. John. It was a warm late summer day in 1965 when John first came into my life, and little did I know, his arrival would be the catalyst for everything that would follow, the good, the bad, and the unimaginable. Oakwood had always been a small, predictable place. The same faces, the same routines, the same way of life. But when John arrived, he was like a breath of fresh air that swept through the town, bringing with him He came to Oakwood from Washington, D.C., a city that, at the time, still held the excitement of being the nation's capital. John had been hired as an assistant to Mr. Gerald, the town's only photographer, who was too old to climb ladders or squat to take photos of weddings or special events. From the very moment I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different from everyone. John was 22, a few years older than me, with dark, wavy hair that fell just over his eyes in the most charming way. His smile was the kind that could light up a whole room, and when he looked at you, it felt like he saw beyond just your face, like he was looking at your soul, trying to understand who you really were. There was an energy about him, a curiosity for the world that I had never seen in Oakwood before. His eyes weren't just fixed on the here and now, they were always looking ahead, always thinking of something more, something bigger. And that, in itself, was a revelation to me. We first met at the annual church festival in Oakwood. I was helping my mother serve food at our booth, wearing the same apron I had worn every year, when I noticed John standing nearby, camera in hand. He approached me with a respectful smile, his voice soft yet confident. "Would you mind if I took a picture of you serving desserts for the newspaper?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with a quiet charm. I was taken aback at first. No boy in Oakwood had ever spoken to me so directly, so openly. We were used to shy glances and awkward exchanges, where messages were passed through friends or siblings. But John was different. "It would look beautiful in the paper with that smile," he added, and my cheeks immediately flushed. No one had ever complimented me so openly before, and it was like the entire world had momentarily stopped to make room for that simple, unexpected exchange. I tried to play it off, laughing nervously. "My father doesn't like me appearing in newspapers," I replied, my voice quiet and unsure, just as I had been taught to speak when talking to strangers, respectfully with my head down. John didn't miss a beat. "That's a shame," he said, with a touch of regret in his voice. "It would be the most beautiful photo I've taken since I got here." From that moment on, it felt as though I ran into John everywhere I went in Oakwood. After church, in the square, at the market, when I was running errands for my mother. He was always there, with a warm smile and a respectful greeting. Every time I saw him, my heart would flutter a little. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, it was the way he made me feel. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not just as a daughter, a sister, or a future wife, but as me, as an individual with hopes, dreams, and desires beyond the town limits. Our courtship started quietly, in secret. We would pass notes through my friend Catherine, meet for quick, stolen moments in corners of the town square, and have hurried conversations when I could sneak away from the watchful eyes of my family. John shared books with me, books that transported me to places far beyond Oakwood. He lent me novels about Paris, Rome, and New York, the very cities I had dreamed of visiting one day. He showed me the photographs he took of Oakwood, and his passion for capturing the world around him made me feel like I was part of something bigger. But it wasn't just the photographs or the books that John shared with me. It was his vision of the future. He spoke with such certainty, such excitement about what life could be, that I couldn't help but believe him. He would often say, "One day, I'll take you away from here, Martha. We'll live in Washington, maybe New York. I'll be a famous photographer. And you can read all the books you want, see all the places you've dreamed of." For the first time, I began to imagine a life that wasn't confined by Oakwood's narrow expectations. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, my dreams could become reality. John opened my eyes to the world beyond, and for the first time, I felt the stirrings of hope. Love, in a way I had never known, was blossoming in my heart. And yet, even as I allowed myself to dream, I knew the path we were walking was not one Oakwood would easily accept. Our love, our dreams were a rebellion against everything this town stood for. But in John, I found someone who understood me, someone who didn't just want to live within the confines of Oakwood's walls, but someone who wanted to build a life of adventure, creativity, and possibility. As I grew closer to John, my world began to change. He was no longer just a boy I saw at church festivals or market days. He was my partner, my future. And although I didn't know it at the time, he was also the catalyst for a change I wasn't yet ready for, but one that would set the course for the rest of my life. In Oakwood, nothing was truly private. Word traveled fast, and every action, every glance was dissected, analyzed, and shared. For that reason, when John and I began our courtship, it was shrouded in secrecy, like a delicate, fragile thing we both had to protect. We knew the consequences of being caught. Oakwood was a town where families held onto tradition tightly, and breaking those traditions could mean shame, not just for you, but for your entire family. It wasn't just a small town. It was a place where everyone knew everyone's business, and everyone had a say in your life, whether you wanted them to or not. We couldn't openly go on dates like the other couples in town, strolling hand in hand through the market or sitting together at the annual church picnic. No, our courtship was far from ordinary. It was quiet, hidden, and for me at least, thrilling. Every moment we spent together felt like a small act of defiance, a break from the predictable, well-mapped-out life that Oakwood had planned for me. We had to be careful, which made everything feel more intense. The stolen glances across the square, the secret letters passed between us through my friend Catherine, our hushed conversations in the shadows of the town's corners. These small, forbidden exchanges felt more powerful than any public display of affection could have. In those moments, John and I shared a world that was ours and ours alone. The outside world didn't matter. It was just me and him, dreaming of a life that Oakwood would never understand. Our meetings were always brief, like secret rendezvous that had to be stolen from the clockwork routine of daily life. We'd meet behind the old church after Sunday service, just when everyone was heading back to their homes, or in the quiet corners of the square when the afternoon sun was low, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The town square, so often full of noise and chatter, was suddenly our haven of silence, our place of escape from the watchful eyes of Oakwood. John would show me the photographs he had taken, pictures of Oakwood's quiet streets, of its people, of its traditions. But it was never just about the pictures. It was about the way he saw the world, beyond Oakwood's borders, beyond the town's narrow expectations. He spoke of New York, of Paris, of the places he had seen and the dreams he had. He would talk about how he wanted to build a life far beyond this town, a life where we could be free from judgment, free to pursue whatever passions we had. "I'll take you away from here one day, Martha," he promised, his voice filled with conviction, his eyes sparkling with dreams that seemed so distant but so real in that moment. "We'll go to Washington, maybe New York. I'll be a famous photographer. And you can read all the books you want, see all the places you've dreamed of." And for a while I believed him. It wasn't just the words he spoke, it was the way he made me feel when he said them. I believed that I could be more than what Oakwood had planned for me, that I could be part of something bigger, something exciting, something that wasn't confined by tradition and expectations. But even as I allowed myself to imagine this new life, I couldn't shake the fear that Oakwood's watchful eyes would find us out. The fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, especially when I saw my father's stern face or heard the murmurs from the neighbors. They didn't know about John, and they certainly didn't know about us. If they did, the consequences could be far worse than I could bear. Still, we carried on. We didn't have a choice. Our love, though secret, was real. Each stolen moment felt like a small rebellion against everything I had been taught. I had been raised to believe that the path for girls was already set, that there was no room for deviation, no room for dreams. But with John, I was learning that perhaps there was room, just enough room for us to carve our own path, even if it had to be hidden for now. Every letter we exchanged, every secret meeting, became a small act of rebellion against the life that Oakwood had laid out for me. In those moments I felt free. I felt like I was truly living, not just existing. And that, I realized, was the start of something that would change everything. It wasn't just a courtship. It was the beginning of my awakening. But little did I know, Oakwood had a way of revealing its secrets, and soon our own would come to light, in a way none of us could have anticipated. I'll never forget the day John came to our house to ask for my father's permission to court me. It was a moment I had both longed for and dreaded. The kind of moment that felt as though the entire weight of Oakwood rested on its outcome. In a small town like ours, family approval was everything. The community watched everything you did, judged every move, and expected the rules to be followed. And for a young girl like me, who had already begun to dream beyond the boundaries of Oakwood, those expectations were suffocating. John had been to the house before, of course, but always in passing, always when my father wasn't around. Now he was coming to face the lion himself, my father, Mr. Anthony. A man of few words but deep convictions, who believed that a man's word and actions were all that mattered. He didn't care for what was in a man's heart, but what he could show through his labor and dedication. Oakwood was a place where respect was earned through hard work, and my father had certainly earned his place as one of the town's most respected men. But it was also a place where rules were rigid, and deviations from tradition were not easily tolerated. John arrived at the house dressed neatly in his best clothes, the ones he had borrowed from Mr. Gerald, the photographer he worked for. He held a simple bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the way. I could tell by the nervous look in his eyes that this was not a task he took lightly. I watched from the porch as he approached, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that this moment would either be the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, or the end of everything we had dreamed about. My father was sitting in his usual chair on the porch, the one no one else was allowed to sit in. It was his place, and it was a symbol of his authority, of the rules he set for his family and, by extension, the town. I could feel the tension in the air, thick as molasses, as John stepped up to the porch and hesitated before my father's chair. "What's this about, boy?" my father asked, his voice gruff, a steely look in his eyes. He didn't offer a handshake, no friendly greeting, just a cold, calculating gaze sizing John up. John straightened himself, trying to appear confident despite the obvious nervousness in his stance. He had come prepared, though, and I could tell he had rehearsed his words. "Sir, I've come here with all respect to ask permission to court your daughter Martha," he said, his voice firm but respectful. My father didn't respond right away. He looked John over, his eyes narrowing, taking in every detail. The silence between them stretched out, thick with tension, until my father finally spoke again, his tone sharp, cutting through the quiet air. "And why should I let my daughter court a stranger who doesn't even have family here?" my father asked, the edge of his skepticism clear. "A young man who works taking pictures and doesn't have land, doesn't have a name. What can you offer her?" John didn't flinch. I could see the determination in his eyes, the kind of determination I had come to love and admire in him. "I care for her, sir," he said, his voice steady now. "I care with respect and with serious intentions. I'm saving money. I have plans to open my own studio soon. I can give your daughter a dignified life." I held my breath, waiting for my father's reaction. For a moment it seemed like he might reject John outright. After all, John was from the city. He didn't have the hard-earned reputation my father did, and he didn't fit into the mold of a respectable Oakwood man. But my father, though stern, was a man of principle, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. My father's gaze softened just slightly as he leaned back in his chair, his eyes still scanning John. "You have plans, boy, but plans don't mean much around here unless you can prove you've got the grit to see them through," he said. "You might have words, but words alone won't feed my daughter. I'll give you a chance, but don't think for one second that this is a free pass." He paused, as though making a decision in his mind. "I'll allow it," he said finally, his voice still stern, but not as harsh as before. "But understand this, you'll court her with honor, with respect. You'll keep your meetings proper in public. She's my daughter, and I won't stand for anyone disrespecting her. If you're serious about this, you'll show me you can be trusted." John nodded, his relief visible, though he still stood tall, not allowing his guard to drop completely. "Thank you, sir. I'll prove that I'm worthy of her." My father gave a final nod, signaling the end of the conversation. "We'll see about that," he muttered, turning his gaze back to the distant horizon. As John left, my heart raced. I knew that the approval was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult. My father had given us a chance, but it was clear that he had set high expectations. John and I would have to prove ourselves not just to my father, but to Oakwood as a whole. The world we were about to step into was one of judgment and tradition, and though we had been given a small victory today, there was still a long way to go. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One moment you're living with hope, believing that the dreams you've carefully crafted will become reality, and the next that dream is shattered, torn apart by forces you never saw coming. For John and me, our dreams of a future together were about to be ripped from us in an instant. John had been coming to visit me every Sunday since the approval from my father. Our courtship, though still closely monitored, was a secret no more. We had found moments to share, moments where we could be ourselves, talking about the future we both dreamed of. One full of adventure, art, and love. John would talk to me about the photography studio he dreamed of opening in Washington, or how we would move to New York and be part of the artistic world that seemed so far away. He made me believe that we could escape the confines of Oakwood, that our love could exist freely without judgment, and we could build a life on our terms. But those dreams, as beautiful as they were, would not last. It all started one Friday evening, a day I'll never forget. I had just finished helping my mother in the kitchen when the door slammed open, and there was my father, his face red with rage. He didn't say anything immediately, but I could see the anger burning in his eyes. It wasn't the kind of anger that came from a disagreement or frustration. It was something darker, something more dangerous. And before I could say a word, he started shouting. "Where is he?" my father barked. "Where's that boy?" I was stunned, confused. "What are you talking about, father?" But I knew deep down I already had a sense of what had happened. Something in my gut told me that this was no ordinary argument, no casual family quarrel. My father's face was pale, and his hands were shaking as if he was barely holding onto his control. "Someone saw you two behind the old church," he spat. "You think I wouldn't find out? Do you think I wouldn't hear the whispers around town?" I felt my heart drop, and in that moment, the weight of Oakwood's eyes bearing down on me was too much to bear. Everyone in the town knew what had happened. Everyone had seen us together, and it seemed that all it took was one pair of eyes to bring the judgment of the whole town crashing down on us. Before I could respond, my father turned and stormed out of the house, muttering under his breath. And that was when I knew that the life we had fought so hard to build was about to come to an end. I ran after him, calling his name, but he didn't stop. He was already heading toward Mr. Gerald's studio, where John worked. I begged him to come back, to listen to me, to think about what he was doing. But my father's rage had blinded him. The weight of honor and reputation, the belief that his daughter had been dishonored, consumed him entirely. By the time I arrived at the studio, it was too late. The door to Mr. Gerald's photography shop was wide open, and inside I saw the scene I wish I could erase from my memory forever. John was lying there, his body still, a pool of blood surrounding him. My heart stopped as I stared at him, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind couldn't process the reality in front of me. I ran to him, but when I touched his face I knew it was too late. John was gone. The sound of my father's voice reached my ears then, angry, shouting at the lifeless form of John. "You dishonored my family. You had no right to come here and disrupt everything." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. My whole body went numb as the reality of what had happened set in. My father had killed him. My father, the man who had raised me, who I had loved and admired, had taken away the only person who had ever truly understood me, the one person who had given me hope for a future beyond Oakwood. And I couldn't comprehend how this had happened. How could my father, who had once been a man of honor, become the very thing he despised? The weight of grief settled over me like a thick fog. The pain of losing John was unbearable. But there was something even worse. something I didn't know how to deal with. It was the realization that my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, had just destroyed everything I held dear. He had torn apart the only future I had dared to dream about, and now I was left with nothing. My father was arrested, of course, and the town quickly turned its eyes on me. The whispers began again, but this time they weren't just about John and me, they were about my father's actions. Everyone in Oakwood had an opinion, and no matter what they said, it felt like the world was collapsing around me. I didn't know where to go or what to do. The dream I had cherished, the future I had imagined with John, had been cruelly ripped away from me. I was left with nothing but the pieces of a broken life and a shattered heart. The town that had once felt like home now seemed like a prison, one where I was trapped by judgment and loss. And in the silence that followed, I realized that my life, our life, would never be the same again. The days that followed John's death were a blur, a suffocating haze of grief, confusion, and shock. I was no longer sure of who I was or where I fit into the world. Everything that had once felt solid, the town I had grown up in, my family, even the love I thought was so certain, had crumbled beneath me. What was left was an unbearable emptiness, the kind that no words or actions could ever fill. I remember the first time I woke up after everything happened. The sunlight streaming through the window felt foreign, like it didn't belong in my room anymore. I hadn't asked for this, I hadn't wanted this life. Yet here I was waking up to a world that felt like it had turned upside down. My father was gone, taken away by the sheriff in handcuffs. His actions, his rage, had severed the one thing that had kept me grounded, the love and respect I had for him, even when I didn't always agree with him. And John, my heart ached with every thought of him. He was gone, taken in an instant by a man who had once called me his daughter. The pain I felt wasn't just physical. It was deep within me, in places I didn't even know existed. The hole left by John's death felt like it would swallow me whole. I couldn't even cry at first. The tears seemed locked away, buried somewhere I couldn't reach. Every time I tried to cry, all I felt was numbness. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, wishing it could carry away the weight of my sorrow. But nothing changed. The world kept spinning and I couldn't stop it. The hardest part wasn't just losing John. It was losing the future I had imagined with him. He had shown me a world beyond Oakwood, a world of possibilities and adventures, a world where I wasn't just someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's future wife. With him I had seen a life where I could be free to dream, to explore, to love without fear. But that future was gone now. The dream of escaping Oakwood, of starting anew somewhere far away, had been ripped from my hands. And then there was the loss of my father, the man who had given me life and taught me the meaning of honor and hard work. He was the same man who, in a moment of uncontrolled rage, had destroyed everything he had worked for, everything he had built, and most painfully, everything he had taught me about love and family. My father's actions had not just taken John's life, they had taken the very foundation of my identity. I no longer knew who I was or what I stood for. The town too felt different. Oakwood had always been a place where everyone knew everyone's business, where people whispered in corners, passing judgment without understanding the full story. Now they were whispering about me. They were whispering about my family. Some of the whispers were filled with pity, some with judgment, but none of them brought me any comfort. The world I had once known, the world that had felt like home, was no longer a place where I belonged. I felt like an outcast in my own life. The shame of what had happened, the shame of having my father's actions laid bare for the whole town to see, was almost too much to bear. There were days when I couldn't even step outside the house without feeling like I was being watched, judged. Even my own reflection in the mirror felt foreign, like I was looking at someone else's life, someone else's tragedy. In those dark days, the only comfort I could find was in the quiet moments, when I could hold John's photographs close to my chest and remember the love we had shared. I would run my fingers over the pictures, tracing the lines of his face, the smile that had always made my heart skip a beat. And in those moments I could almost hear his voice again, telling me that we would be together, that everything would be okay. But it wasn't. And no amount of memories could change the reality of what had happened. It was in the silence of my grief that I started to understand something profound. Grief isn't just about missing someone. It's about the world you lose when that person is gone. The future you thought you would have, the life you thought you would live, is suddenly ripped away, leaving you to rebuild from the ruins. But how do you rebuild when you don't even know where to start? In the days that followed, I tried to find some sense of normalcy. I went through the motions, helping my mother, talking to neighbors, but I felt disconnected from everything. I was like a ghost moving through a world that no longer made sense. Nothing felt real anymore. My past, my future. It all seemed to dissolve into this unbearable present where the pain never went away. And yet, in that pain, I knew something deep within me was beginning to stir. Somewhere deep down I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. But how could I move forward when the weight of my past was so heavy? That was the question I didn't have an answer to. After the storm that had torn through my life, there was only silence. My father was gone, my love was gone, and Oakwood, once the only world I knew, had become a place too heavy to breathe in. The weight of the whispers, the looks of pity and judgment, was unbearable. The town I had once called home was now a cage I could no longer stay in. Every corner, every street, reminded me of the dreams I had lost, of the life that had been ripped from me in a single moment. It was my mother who, with quiet strength, made the decision for me. She saw how broken I was, how the walls of Oakwood were closing in around me, suffocating me with its narrow expectations and the stain of my father's actions. She knew Oakwood could never heal me, not after everything that had happened. She didn't say it directly, but her eyes spoke louder than words. It was time for me to leave. Go to Louisville, she said one evening, her voice soft but resolute. Your Aunt Josephine has offered to take you in. You need to be far from here. You need space to breathe, to heal. I had never thought about leaving Oakwood, let alone moving to a big city like Louisville. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Louisville was only a few hours away, but it felt like another world entirely, bigger, faster, and far removed from the tight-knit, small-town life I had always known. But deep down, I knew that staying in Oakwood would keep me trapped in the past. If I stayed, I would be suffocated by the memories of John, of my father's actions, and of the life that had been torn apart. So the next morning, I packed what little I had left, clothes, a few photographs of John, and the few belongings that still held meaning. I left Oakwood with a suitcase full of regrets and unanswered questions, but with the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, a fresh start awaited me somewhere else. The bus ride to Louisville was long, and my thoughts were heavy. I looked out the window, watching Oakwood fade into the distance, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. As the bus took me further away, I felt like I was leaving behind more than just a town. I was leaving behind the person I used to be. The girl who had dreamed of a life with John, the girl who had once been part of a family that seemed invincible, was gone. All that remained was a woman uncertain of who she was and what came next. When I arrived in Louisville, Aunt Josephine was waiting for me at the bus station. She had been a stranger to me in many ways. My mother's sister, yes, but someone I had never truly known. She was older, independent, with a life of her own that seemed far removed from the small-town existence I had grown up with. But when I saw her, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. She wasn't a stranger, she was family, and that meant more than anything right now. Aunt Josephine's apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of herbs and spices she used in her cooking. It was a far cry from the house I had left behind, with its memories of my mother's cooking and my father's heavy footsteps. But it was a new space, a new chapter in my life, and I was ready for it, even though it scared me. For the first few weeks, I stayed in the small guest room at Aunt Josephine's place. I didn't venture out much. I spent my days sitting by the window, looking at the bustling city below, feeling disconnected from everything. Louisville was so different from Oakwood, so alive with energy, but I didn't know how to step into it. The world outside felt too big, too foreign for me. Aunt Josephine didn't push me to talk about Oakwood or what had happened. She simply allowed me the space I needed, offering me a place to rest and heal. Slowly, I began to adjust to the rhythm of the city. I started exploring the local neighborhoods, taking in the sights, the sounds, the people. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was different, and for the first time in months I started to feel a flicker of something inside me, hope maybe, or at least the possibility of it. After a few weeks, Aunt Josephine helped me find a job at a small clothing factory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. The factory was nothing like the photography studio I had dreamed of opening with John, but it gave me structure, something to focus on other than the swirling emotions that threatened to drown me. I spent my days working with fabric, stitching pieces of clothing together, my hands busy and my mind occupied. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward independence. For the first time, I wasn't defined by the tragedy that had befallen me. I was defined by the work I was doing, by the effort I was putting into building something new for myself. Slowly, Oakwood started to fade in the background. The pain didn't go away, but it became quieter. I could hear my own voice again, and it wasn't as broken as I had feared. Louisville was no longer just a place I was hiding in. It was starting to feel like the beginning of a new life, one where I could choose who I was and what I wanted to become. And though I still thought of John often, and though I still felt the absence of the life we should have had together, I realized that this new chapter, however uncertain, was mine to write. Oakwood had been my past, but Louisville, with its wide-open possibilities, was my future. In the weeks following my arrival in Louisville, I felt like a woman caught between two worlds, the past that I couldn't escape and the future that was still a mystery to me. The pain of losing John, the pain of what my father had done, still clung to me like a second skin. There were days when I woke up and couldn't remember why I had bothered to get out of bed. But as much as I longed for the comfort of Oakwood's familiar streets, I knew I had to leave that part of me behind. The only way forward was to heal, to start again. The first step toward that healing came from a place I hadn't expected: work. When Aunt Josephine suggested I help her at a small clothing factory she worked at, I hesitated. The thought of leaving the safety of her apartment, of facing the outside world, felt overwhelming. But I also knew that I couldn't sit around and wait for time to fix everything. So reluctantly I agreed. I was assigned to the sewing room, where rows of women worked tirelessly stitching, cutting, and sewing fabric into clothes. The factory was nothing special. It was old with peeling walls and dim lighting, but there was something soothing about it. The hum of the sewing machines, the rhythmic sound of the needle puncturing fabric, became a kind of quiet meditation. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It gave me something to focus on besides my grief. Each day I would walk to the factory, my mind blank, my hands busy. There was no room for sorrow when my hands were so occupied with the tasks at hand. In those first few days the work felt mechanical. I wasn't thinking about my life, about what had happened to me. I was simply doing. And that was enough. As I sewed the seams of skirts and dresses, I started to feel a strange sense of accomplishment. With each completed garment, I felt like I was piecing myself back together, stitch by stitch. The work, though repetitive, became a kind of therapy for me. But it wasn't just the work itself that helped me heal, it was the women around me. At first, I didn't talk much to the other workers. I was too caught up in my own pain, too afraid that if I let anyone in, the floodgates of my grief would open again. But slowly, as the weeks passed, I began to notice the kindness of the women who worked beside me. There was Helen, the older woman with silver hair who always had a warm smile for me, and Lucy, a younger woman who had a mischievous sense of humor that made the long hours pass more quickly. They didn't ask questions about my past, and I didn't offer any answers. But in their quiet company, I began to feel less alone. They didn't treat me like a fragile, broken person. They treated me like a fellow worker, someone who was part of the rhythm of the factory. Helen, especially, became a kind of surrogate mother to me. After a few weeks, she started to tell me stories about her own life, about her children, her dreams, and the struggles she had faced. She spoke of her husband who had passed away many years ago, and how she had learned to live on her own. In her stories, I found a kind of strength I didn't know I had in me. She had lived through loss, through pain, and yet she had managed to keep going, to keep living. In a strange way, she showed me that it was possible to survive, even if you weren't the same person as you had been before. With their help, I began to open up, slowly at first and then more freely. The factory became more than just a place of work. It became a place where I started to rebuild my sense of self. The work gave me purpose, and the friendships I made gave me warmth. I was no longer just a broken girl from Oakwood. I was a woman who was learning to live again, learning to take pride in the work I did and the person I was becoming. I was still grieving, still carrying the weight of my past, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. The stitches I sewed into the fabric were like little threads of hope, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of my new life. Each day was a small victory, a victory over the grief that had once felt all-consuming. And though I hadn't yet fully healed, I knew that one day I would. The journey was long, But I was learning that healing didn't have to be immediate or perfect. Just had to keep going. It was a warm autumn afternoon when Aunt Josephine made the offer that would change everything for me. We were sitting at her kitchen table sipping tea, the rich smell of freshly baked bread filling the air. The simple pleasures of her home were a comfort to me, especially after the chaos and heartbreak of my past. Louisville had become a place where I could breathe again. But I still wasn't sure what my future held. I had found some peace, yes, but I hadn't yet figured out what it meant to truly rebuild my life. Aunt Josephine had always been an independent woman, fiercely self-sufficient. She had run her own small fabric store in Louisville for years, and it had flourished because of her determination and her eye for quality. I admired her deeply, but I also saw the toll that hard work had taken on her. She was getting older, and the days spent managing the store were wearing her down. Despite her resilience, I could see the fatigue in her eyes, a quiet exhaustion that had grown over the years. It was on that afternoon as we sat together that she turned to me with a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before, something that was both hopeful and serious. She set down her teacup, folded her hands on the table, and leaned in slightly, as if she was about to share a secret. "Martha," she began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about the future. You've been with me here for some time now, helping out in the store, learning how things work. I've seen your talent, your eye for detail, the way you've picked up things so quickly. You've shown me more than just your skill. You've shown me your heart, your dedication." Her words hit me differently. I had always been the one helping, never expecting much in return. I had found solace in the routine of work, in the quiet act of contributing, but I never imagined it would lead to anything more. I wasn't used to being seen in this way, not like this. "I want to make you an offer, Martha," Aunt Josephine continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want you to become my partner in the business. I know I'm getting older, and the store needs someone who can carry it forward. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I believe you're the one who can do it. You've got the talent, the vision, and maybe, just maybe, we can take this business to a place it's never been before." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I hadn't expected this, not in a million years. I had come to Louisville to escape, to heal, to survive. But now, Aunt Josephine was offering me something far greater than just a place to stay or a job to fill the days. She was offering me a chance to shape my own future, to build something that was mine, something that had meaning. I sat there trying to process the weight of her offer. A business partner? Me? I wasn't sure if I was ready for that kind of responsibility, for the kind of commitment that it would take. The fear crept in, fear of failure, fear of not living up to her expectations, fear of taking on something that was too big for me. But then something else crept in too, hope. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling lost, feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. I thought about how John had made me believe that a life beyond Oakwood was possible, that I could be more than just a girl following a set path. And now here was Aunt Josephine, offering me the opportunity to create my own future, to do something meaningful, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can live up to what you've built." Aunt Josephine smiled warmly, a knowing smile that only someone who had lived a life of hard-earned experience could have. "You don't have to be ready," she said gently. "You'll learn just like you've learned everything else. And I'll be here to help you every step of the way. We'll do this together." Her words were the reassurance I needed. I didn't have to do it all on my own. And more than that, I realized I didn't want to. I had spent too much time alone, carrying the weight of my past. This offer, this chance to build something with Aunt Josephine, was exactly what I needed. That evening I made the decision. I would accept her offer. I would become her partner, not just in business but in life. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that this was the right path. I had finally found a purpose beyond the pain, beyond the loss. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of excitement, excited to build, to grow, to create. In the months that followed, Aunt Josephine and I worked side by side, transforming the small fabric store into something that began to draw attention, not just for its fine products, but for the personal touch we put into everything we did. It wasn't easy. There were long days and even longer nights, but together we made it work. With each new piece of fabric we cut, each dress we designed, we were building more than just a business. We were building a new life, one stitch at a time. And for the first time in years, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city's noise seemed distant, muffled by the soft glow of my lamp and the warmth of Aunt Josephine's kitchen. I had just finished a long day at the store, carefully measuring fabric for a new order, when I noticed an envelope sitting on the kitchen table. The handwriting was familiar, though it had been years since I had seen it. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the flowing script. It was from my mother. For a moment I sat there, staring at the envelope in my hands. I hadn't heard from her in so long. The last time I saw her, I had been leaving Oakwood, fleeing from the pain of my past, and I hadn't looked back. There had been no letters, no phone calls, no word from my family. The distance between us, both physical and emotional, had been too great. I had closed that door, or at least I had tried to. But now, here it was, the letter from my mother, the woman who had given me life, the woman who had stood by me in the years before everything had fallen apart. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. What could she possibly want after all this time? Did she even understand the depth of what had happened? The anger, the shame, the loss? I had spent so many years hiding from my past, burying the pain of Oakwood and everything it represented. Could I face it now? I took a deep breath and opened the letter. "My dear Martha," the letter began. "I know it's been many years since we've communicated. Life has a way of changing things, and I fear the distance between us has grown in ways I never intended. But not a day goes by that I don't think of you, and not a day goes by that I don't pray for your happiness." I felt the lump in my throat tighten as I read her words. She had always been a woman of few words, especially when it came to emotions. But this letter was different. It wasn't just a note to check in or a polite exchange. It was filled with the kind of raw honesty that only a mother could write to her daughter. "My heart aches every day thinking of the way things turned out for you, and for our family," she continued. "Your father and I may have failed you in many ways, but please know that I have never stopped loving you. I am sorry for what happened, for what we couldn't protect you from, and for the decisions we made that tore us apart." Reading those words was like opening a wound I thought had healed. But instead of the familiar bitterness I had expected, something else filled the space inside me. It was the beginning of something I hadn't realized I still needed: understanding. My mother had acknowledged the pain, the mistakes, the hurt, and I could feel her regret through every word. She wasn't just offering an apology. She was offering me something far more precious: the chance for reconciliation. The letter went on, sharing news about the family. My brother Joseph had gotten married and had children of his own, and my younger sister Grace had become a teacher. My mother spoke of the house in Oakwood, which had changed little over the years, and how my father had grown quieter since his time in jail. But she never mentioned him directly, and I realized that perhaps some things were better left unsaid. Instead, she focused on me, on the daughter she had lost and the relationship that had been fractured beyond repair. "Your father," she wrote, "is still here, still holding on to his pride, but I know deep down, he regrets the way things ended. I don't know if I can ask you to forgive him, but I want you to know that he's not the man he was. Neither of us are. But you, my dear, you've always been my heart. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to come home. If not to Oakwood, then to me. I love you always." As I finished the letter, I felt a flood of emotions that I hadn't expected. The anger and hurt that had built up over the years were still there, but they no longer consumed me. Instead, there was space for something else: grief for what we had lost, yes, but also a sense of peace. My mother had reached out. She had broken the silence that had stretched between us for so long, and she had done it with humility and love. I folded the letter carefully and held it to my chest for a moment. I didn't know what to do with it, or what to do with the emotions it stirred up in me. I didn't know if I could forgive my father, or if I was ready to return to Oakwood. But one thing was certain: I wasn't as alone as I had once believed. There was still a thread of connection, a possibility of healing, even if it wasn't immediate. I looked up at Aunt Josephine, who had been quietly observing me from across the table. "It's from my mother," I said softly, my voice breaking. "She wants me to come home." Aunt Josephine smiled gently, her wise eyes full of understanding. "Home is where you find peace, Martha. If you can find it with her, then go. But if not, you've created a home for yourself here. And that's just as important." The letter from my mother wasn't just an apology. It was a reminder that, even in the most broken relationships, there's always a chance for healing. And in that moment I realized that the past I had been running from was still part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I could move forward whether with my family or on my own terms because I had the power to choose. I had always thought that returning to Oakwood would feel like stepping back into the life I had left behind. A life full of memories, both good and bad, that I could never fully escape. But when the day finally came, I realized something profound. Returning wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about confronting it, facing the people and places that had shaped me, and most importantly, finding a way to make peace with it all. The journey back to Oakwood was a quiet one. The train ride felt long, and each mile that passed seemed to take me further into a past that I had spent years running from. My mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts. What would it be like to see the town again? Would people still remember me? Would they whisper about my father, about John? The weight of these questions hung heavy on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. When the train finally pulled into the Oakwood station, I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The town that had once felt so familiar now seemed distant, almost alien. The cobblestone streets I had walked as a child now seemed smaller, quieter. The houses, once full of life and laughter, looked weathered and worn, like memories too old to hold on to. As I walked through the town, memories of my childhood flooded back. The scent of fresh-baked bread from my mother's kitchen, the sound of my father's hammer as he worked on the houses in town, the laughter of my younger siblings echoing through the halls. But there were other memories too, the harsh words, the control, the oppressive weight of expectations that had shaped me, molded me into someone I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. I made my way to the old house where I had grown up, my heart pounding in my chest. It looked almost the same, with the same front porch and the same flower beds that my mother had lovingly tended to. But there was a sense of emptiness now, a quiet that hadn't been there before. I could almost hear my mother's footsteps inside, her gentle hum as she worked, but all that remained was silence. I stood at the gate for a long time, looking at the house that had once been the center of my world. I wanted to open the door, to step inside and relive the memories, but something held me back. The house was no longer mine to claim. It was a symbol of everything I had left behind, everything I had lost. But even as I stood there, torn between the past and the present, I realized that I didn't need to hold on to this house, this town, to keep the memories alive. The memories lived inside me, in the person I had become, not in the place I had left behind. I decided to go to the cemetery next, to visit John's grave. It had been years since I had been there, and though I knew I wasn't ready to forgive everything that had happened, I also knew that I couldn't move forward without facing this final chapter of my past. When I reached the cemetery, I found his grave easily. The headstone, simple and unadorned, was weathered by time, just like everything else in Oakwood. I knelt beside it, my heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. I placed a single rose on the grave, the only gesture I could offer for the life that was stolen from him, from us. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, John. I should have done more. I should have been braver. But I promise you I will live. I will live for both of us." As I stood up and walked away, I felt a strange sense of release, as if something heavy had lifted from my chest. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had begun to make peace with the past. Oakwood no longer had a hold on me. It would always be a part of me, but it wouldn't define who I was or who I could become. The journey back to Louisville wasn't just about leaving Oakwood behind. It was about accepting it, acknowledging the pain it had caused, and finding a way to move forward without being weighed down by it. And so, as the train carried me back to the life I had built, I realized that returning to Oakwood hadn't been about finding closure. It had been about finding the strength to let go. As I sit here today, in the comfort of my small apartment in Lexington, Kentucky, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. Life has a way of throwing challenges at you when you least expect it, but it also gives you the strength to face them head-on, even when you feel like you're drowning in despair. My journey from the quiet streets of Oakwood to the bustling fabric store in Louisville has been filled with both loss and triumph. But through it all, I've learned one thing above all else. Resilience is born from within, and it's the only thing that can carry you through even the darkest of times. When I first left Oakwood, I had no idea what awaited me. I was running from a past that had been filled with pain. My father's actions, the loss of my love, John, and the heavy burden of shame that hung over my family. The town that had once been my home now felt like a prison, suffocating me with its judgment and expectations. But in Louisville I found something I had never known before. A chance to rebuild, to start fresh, and to rediscover who I truly was. It wasn't easy. I worked tirelessly at the fabric store, learning not just the craft but also the value of patience and perseverance. Every stitch I sewed, every dress I crafted was like a small victory, a testament to my strength and determination to keep going. With Aunt Josephine by my side, I not only learned the art of sewing, but I also learned the value of community. The women I worked with at the store became my second family, people who didn't see me as the broken girl from Oakwood, but as Martha, the woman who was learning to stand on her own 2 feet again. The day Aunt Josephine offered me the chance to become her partner was the turning point. She had seen something in me that I hadn't yet recognized in myself. The potential to rebuild my life, not just in terms of work, but in terms of my spirit. Her faith in me was the push I needed to take ownership of my future. It wasn't about the business or the fabric. It was about the power I had to shape my own destiny, to build a life that was mine and mine alone. Through hard work, dedication, and the support of those around me, I not only rebuilt my career but also my sense of self. I moved from a place of deep sorrow to one of quiet strength. The shadows of Oakwood still lingered in my heart, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to live with the pain, to accept that life wasn't perfect, and that some scars would never fully heal. But that didn't mean I couldn't keep going. I realized that the strength I had within me was far greater than any tragedy I had faced. And as I look back now, I can see how far I've come. The pain of losing John, of losing my father's respect, will always be with me, but it no longer controls me. I've built a life filled with purpose, with the quiet joy of creating something meaningful, and with the peace that comes from accepting the past without letting it dictate my future. My legacy, I've come to realize, isn't defined by the tragedy I endured, but by the strength I found in myself to rise above it. Every dress I've created, every smile I've shared, and every step I've taken forward is a testament to that strength. It is a legacy not just of survival, but of living with intention and hope. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to remind you, dear reader, that no matter what life throws at you, there is always a way forward. The past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. We are all capable of rebuilding, of finding new purpose, and of creating a future that reflects our true strength. It may not be the life we imagined, but it is our life to build, to live, and to cherish. So to anyone who finds themselves in the depths of pain, in the shadow of loss, remember that you too have the strength to rise, to rebuild, and to leave behind a legacy of resilience. And know that, like me, you are never truly alone on this journey.